a very interesting question. And you might be able to say simplistically, well, there probably is some genetic component to every tumor, because as far as we know, you don't get even one malignant cell without there being some mutation. But when that happens, and whether it happens in children generally, you can say that in a family that has a cancer mutation, the children are like the canary in the mine, right? If you get a cancer when you're young, then we look for genetic causes right away. But let's look at it this way too. In leukemia, which is common in children, those aren't very often associated with a familial genetic mutation, and yet we classify leukemias according to their mutations and know how to treat them for that. So in terms of me diagnosing a child with a tumor, I've had very few children or young adults who had another neuroendocrine tumor in their family. Let me define for you first what kinds of cases I'm going to talk about. So if I talk about neuroendocrine tumors, I can talk about neuroendocrine tumors in the intestine, appendix, pancreas, and lung. Those are the most common, and actually in young women, breast or ovary. Those are the most common. And then I'm going to add to that pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma. So if we talk about that whole group of neuroendocrine tumors, and you talk about what percent of them have a mutation, I will back up and say that we've been following families for over 30 years, and we have probably looked at, say, 2,000 families, and we only have, at the latest count, I think 19 families in which there were 2 generations that had a neuroendocrine tumor mutation or any other cancer mutation. So it's very rare, even in children, that we would find a mutated cancer gene responsible for their tumor. If we go back and say, well, what families are most predisposed to get neuroendocrine tumors? I won't be able to name all of them for you, but the big ones are the neurofibromatosis gene, NF1, the von Hippel-Lindau gene, VHL, the MEN1 gene, MEN1 and MEN2, the RET proto-oncogene, and then if we skip from those neuroendocrine tumors over to the pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma, there's another set of genes that's associated with those, and those are the SBH genes. There's a set of 4 of those, now 5, and those are the most common in the pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma. Well, we talked a little bit before about how unusual neuroendocrine tumors being in more than one generation is. So this is already an unusual situation for a father and a son to both have a neuroendocrine tumor. And I would say my advice would be for at least the son who has the neuroendocrine tumor to visit with a cancer geneticist. because there, as we talked about before, there are probably at least 10 genes that we know of that are important in neuroendocrine tumors. So to see which ones of those genes might be in this family, and then they would also be able to tell you, well, is this a gene that passes directly from one generation to the next, so that there's a 50-50 chance of there being a child with the same mutation? Or is this what we call an autosomal recessive gene, which means that both parents have to have one very unusual gene, and both of those genes be transferred to the child? So this is a very complicated question, and I think a cancer geneticist would need to be consulted in this case. We need to look at that in two ways. Would you be diagnosed with would you maybe not know that you have neuroendocrine tumor and then you're pregnant? And would the gene pass through the placenta? No, that's not, I shouldn't say not possible, but I've never heard of a case of that. Can you carry a pregnancy safely while you have a neuroendocrine tumor? I haven't had this situation, but my husband, Tom Odorizio, as you know, takes care of many more people with neuroendocrine tumor than I do. And he has monitored several young women in their 20s and 30s through a pregnancy while they had a neuroendocrine tumor, and he maintained them on sandostatin throughout the whole pregnancy with no ill effects on the child. So that's another question. And the third way to look at this would be to say, if I know I have a gene for a neuroendocrine tumor, what are the chances that I would pass that on to my child genetically? And that's a case where you actually would need to, I would advise you to meet with a cancer oncologist during the pregnancy to answer that. We do not think at the moment that there are any neuroendocrine tumor genes that would cause a tumor serious enough that you would say, I don't want, none of us would want to pass on a gene, a mutated gene, if we could help it. But people with neuroendocrine tumors, by and large, live a full and unhappy life, and they can live it even better now that we know we can diagnose earlier and treat earlier. So I would say, even if you know that you have a gene that predisposes to a neuroendocrine tumor, meet with a cancer geneticist during your pregnancy. And the important thing would be testing the child if that's recommended, and then monitoring during the child's life.